Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The night my father tried to have me removed from a room I owned, he was wearing the cufflinks I'd given him for his 60th birthday. Gold. Engraved with his initials. I'd had them made at a jeweler in the financial district, paid for them with money he told me I was too incompetent to ever earn. I noticed them catching the light as he pointed at me and said the words I will never forget for the rest of my life. Get her out of here. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I am not someone who grew up dreaming of revenge. I didn't spend my adult years constructing an elaborate plan to humiliate my family in public. What I built because I had no other choice. What they walked into that evening at the Harrington Country Club was not a trap I set. It was simply the life I had been quietly living. The life they had never bothered to ask about because they had decided years before that there was nothing worth knowing. But we'll get to that. My name is Diane Carter. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia in a house that always smelled of my mother's perfume and my father's ambition. My parents, Gerald and Patricia Carter, were not cruel people in the way that word usually conjures. They did not yell. They did not strike. They were something more insidious. They were dismissive. They had decided sometime around my 14th birthday that my older brother Marcus was the future of the Carter family, and that I was, at best, a pleasant footnote. Marcus was tall, articulate, and obsessively interested in business from the time he was 16. He interned at my father's law firm. He went to Wharton. He gave speeches at Thanksgiving about market cycles while I passed the rolls. My parents looked at him the way people look at a painting they paid a great deal of money for, with proprietary pride, as though his success was something they had manufactured themselves. I was interested in hospitality. Specifically, in the business architecture of hotels and private clubs. The financial mechanics of membership, real estate leverage, brand positioning. I had known this since I was 12 years old and read a profile of a woman who had taken a single deteriorating golf resort in South Carolina and turned it into a 12-property portfolio worth $340 million. I cut the article out of a magazine and kept it in my desk drawer for years. When I told my father I wanted to study hospitality management at Cornell, he looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something embarrassing in public. Hospitality, he repeated. Hotel and club management, I clarified. There's a real estate and finance concentration. The alumni network is. Diane. He set down his fork. Marcus is going to Wharton. I can support one graduate program tuition at a top school. You understand that? I did understand that. I also understood from the way he said it, that even if there had been money for both of us, the answer would have been the same. I attended Penn State on a partial scholarship, supplemented by 3 part-time jobs. I studied hospitality management with a secondary concentration in real estate finance. I graduated with honors. My parents attended the ceremony. My mother said my dress was a nice color. My father shook my hand. I moved to Philadelphia after graduation and took a position as an events coordinator at a mid-range hotel downtown. It was not glamorous work. I managed corporate retreats and wedding receptions and once, memorably, a bar mitzvah that ended with a minor electrical fire. But I was watching everything, how the property operated, where the margins lived, where ownership bled money without knowing it. After 3 years, I moved into a junior acquisitions role at a regional hospitality investment firm called Kellner Group. My manager there was a woman named Sylvia Okafor, who had an almost supernatural ability to see a failing property and understand exactly what it was missing. She became the most important professional relationship of my life. She also became one of my closest friends, the kind of friend who answers the phone at 11 at night and says, before you've spoken, what happened and how bad is it? At Kellner I learned the full architecture of the business. How to structure a purchase, how to negotiate management contracts, how to identify the specific operational failures that made a property underperform. I was good at it. I was, as Sylvia told me once with characteristic bluntness, unnaturally good at it for someone your age. My parents knew I worked in hotel stuff. My mother occasionally told people I was in hospitality, with a tone that suggested this was a polite way of saying I folded towels for a living. My father, when the subject arose, moved past it quickly. Marcus, meanwhile, had joined a financial advisory firm, married a woman named Courtney whose family had a box at Citizens Bank Park, and purchased a home in Villanova. My parents spoke of him with the specific breathless pride of people who believe they are watching history being made. I was happy for Marcus. Genuinely. He had worked hard and built something real. My grief was not about him. It was about the fact that I had also worked hard, had also built something real, and the people who were supposed to be watching simply weren't. At 31 I left Kellner Group. Sylvia cried. Almost did. But the opportunity in front of me was too significant to remain employed by someone else. There is a particular type of private club that exists in older American cities. The kind built in the early 20th century when the architecture was meant to communicate permanence and exclusivity, and when the membership was structured to ensure that certain people never had to share a room with certain other people. By the time I encountered the Harrington Country Club, it had been declining for 11 years. The Harrington sat on 14 acres outside Philadelphia. It had a golf course that needed $2.4 million in drainage work, a main clubhouse with original 1923 millwork that was genuinely stunning and completely unmaintained, a restaurant that had been hemorrhaging members for a decade, and a board of directors composed entirely of men over 70 who had been arguing about the drainage issue since 2013. I spent 4 months studying it before I made my first move. I hired a property assessor, reviewed 15 years of financial filings, interviewed 6 former members, and had 3 conversations with the club's longest-serving groundskeeper, a man named Calvin who knew exactly where every problem was buried, literally and figuratively. At 32, through a holding company called Revere Property Group, I acquired a controlling interest in the Harrington Country Club for $4.1 million. It was the majority of everything I had, plus a structured loan I'd negotiated with a private lender Sylvia introduced me to. The night I signed the closing documents, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, completely still because I couldn't decide whether I had just done the smartest or most reckless thing of my life. It was both. That's usually how it goes. What followed was 3 years of work that I will not fully describe here because it would take another hour, but the summary is this. I fixed the drainage. I restored the millwork. I hired a new executive chef, rebuilt the membership structure, brought in a club manager named Derek Torres who had run 2 of the top-rated private clubs in the country and who, when I called him, said, "I've been waiting for someone to call about that property for 5 years." We relaunched the Harrington 18 months after acquisition. Within 2 years, membership had increased by 340%. The waiting list had 200 names on it. I owned it through Revere Property Group. My name did not appear in any public-facing materials. The club's website listed Derek as general manager. The board, now restructured, knew who I was. The staff knew who I was. The members by and large did not. This was deliberate. Not because I was hiding, but because I had learned by then that the work speaks more clearly when you aren't standing in front of it making noise. My parents had been members of the Harrington since 1999. They had joined before the decline, when it still carried the social weight my father believed it should. During the years of deterioration they had stayed, out of loyalty, out of habit, and because the membership fee had decreased significantly as the club struggled. When the Harrington relaunched under new management and became, suddenly, one of the most sought-after private clubs in the region again, my parents experienced this as a personal vindication. They had stayed through the hard years. They had believed in it. They did not know who had made the recovery possible. Every year in October, the Harrington hosted its annual Founders Gala, a formal fundraising event tied to the club's original establishment in 1923. It was the social centerpiece of the fall calendar. Black tie, seated dinner, 240 guests. The waiting list for tables was 6 months long. I attended every year. Quietly, I sat with Derek and the board at a table near the back of the main room, and watched the club operate at full capacity and felt something I can only describe as private satisfaction, the kind that doesn't need an audience. My parents attended every year as well. We had never been at the same gala. The club was large. I had not sought them out and they had not known to look for me. This year was different. It was my father's 65th birthday. My mother had decided, in the way my mother decided things, completely and without consultation, that the Founders Gala would serve as the backdrop for a family celebration. She had arranged for a table of 8. She had invited Marcus and Courtney, my Aunt Renee and her husband Paul, and 2 of my father's oldest friends, a couple named the Forsyths. She had not invited me. I learned about it from Marcus, who texted me 3 weeks before the event. "Mom's doing a birthday dinner for Dad at the Harrington Gala. So you know. I asked if you were coming and she said, Diane doesn't really enjoy these things. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I replied, thanks for telling me. Have a good time. Marcus sent back, that's not what I meant. Come if you want. I'm not uninviting you. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I called Derek. Are you coming to the gala? He asked. Yes, I said. I'll be at the owner's table. There was a pause. Diane, he said carefully, your family has a reservation. I know. Another pause. Do you want me to handle anything? No, I said. I want you to handle everything exactly the way you always do. I'll handle what I handle. The evening of the gala, I arrived at the Harrington at 6:45 p.m. I wore a navy evening gown I had purchased in New York, not because I was dressing for a confrontation, but because I had learned, over years of operating in rooms where people make judgments quickly, that the way you present yourself is a form of communication. The dress was simple and expensive in the way that simple expensive things are. I wore my grandmother's diamond pendant. I wore shoes that hurt by the end of the night and were worth it. Derek met me at the entrance. He was in his usual immaculate black tie. He squeezed my hand once and said, "You look like an owner." "I am an owner," I said. "I know," he said. "That's the point." I went to my table, table 1, positioned at the slight elevation of the room's original platform, where the founders had placed the head table in 1923, and I sat down with a glass of Chablis and spoke to the board members around me and watched the room fill up. I saw my parents arrive at 7:15. My father was in his tuxedo, the cufflinks catching the chandelier light. My mother was in burgundy, which she always wore to formal events because my father had once told her it suited her. Marcus and Courtney came in behind them. Aunt Renee and Paul. Forsyths. 8 people at a table that was, I noted, beautifully set. Derek ran a tight event. They didn't see me. The room was large, the light was warm, and I was seated at elevation at the far end. I watched them settle. I watched my father shake hands with one of his friends from the table next to theirs. I watched my mother straighten the centerpiece with the instinct of a woman who had been straightening centerpieces at events for 40 years. I felt something move through me that was not anger. It was older than anger. It was the specific ache of a child who spent years trying to be seen by people who were looking elsewhere, and who has spent the adult years since learning to be seen by the world instead. I did not go to their table. I did not need to. It was Courtney who saw me first. Courtney, to her credit, had always been kind to me in the neutral, uncomplicated way of someone who is not invested in the family drama but is not going to pretend it doesn't exist. She leaned toward Marcus, said something, and I saw Marcus look up and find me across the room. He raised his glass slightly. I raised mine. My father followed Marcus's eye line. The moment he registered who was sitting at table 1, at the elevated head table in a navy gown with the club's board of directors, I watched his expression move through several distinct phases. Confusion first. Then a kind of recalibration. Then, because my father was a man who interpreted the world through a fixed lens, something that hardened into offense. He said something to my mother. She turned. She looked. I held their gaze and smiled. Not broadly. Just enough. My father stood up. What happened next took approximately 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know this because Derek timed it, because Derek times everything at his events, and because he told me afterward that those 4 minutes and 40 seconds were the most interesting 4 minutes and 40 seconds in the Harrington's 100-year history. My father walked across the room toward my table. Not to greet me. I could tell by his posture, the forward lean, the deliberate pace, that he was in the mode I had grown up watching. Gerald Carter, attorney, moving toward a problem he intended to resolve. He didn't approach me. He stopped at the edge of the platform and intercepted Derek, who had been moving through the room in his natural circuit. "Excuse me," my father said to Derek. "I need to speak with someone in management." "Of course, sir," Derek said. "I'm Derek Torres, general manager. How can I help?" My father glanced at me. I was 3 feet away, visible, watching, and lowered his voice in the way people lower their voices when they want to be overheard anyway. "That woman at table 1. She doesn't belong there. That's the board table." Derek's expression remained professionally pleasant. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" "I'm Gerald Carter. My wife and I have been members here for 25 years. I don't know how she ended up at that table, but it's inappropriate. I'd like her moved." Derek said nothing for 1 second. Who? I'm asking you, my father said, his voice sharpening, to remove her from that table. She's embarrassing herself and she's embarrassing this family. From across the room my mother had materialized. She arrived at my father's side the way she always arrived in moments of conflict. Quietly, efficiently, and fully aligned. We've been members here for 20 years, she said to Derek. We know how this club operates. I completely understand, Derek said in the tone of a man who understands a great deal. Then he turned not to them but to me. Miss Carter, he said clearly. I apologize for the interruption. Your father has requested that you be moved from table 1. He paused. Shall I escort your family to their table, or would you prefer I address the guest pass situation first? The room around us had gone very quiet. Not silent. There were still 239 other people having conversations, but in the immediate orbit of that exchange the air had changed. My father turned to look at me fully for the first time. I set down my glass. Derek, I said, please don't revoke their passes tonight. It's my father's birthday. Derek nodded once. Of course. My father said, what? I stood up. I was eye level with him on the platform and then I stepped down to the floor and we were standing 4 feet apart under the original 1923 chandelier, the one I had paid $180,000 to restore, and I looked at my father, at the cufflinks, at the tuxedo, at the face that had looked through me for 30 years. And I said very quietly, Dad, I own this club. The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My mother made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a gasp. Something in between. My father said, what are you talking about? Revere Property Group, I said. That's my holding company. I acquired controlling interest 3 years ago. Derek works for me. The board. I gestured at table 1, where 4 people were watching with the careful stillness of people trying very hard not to appear to be watching, reports to me. The membership structure, the renovation, the drainage work on the back 9 that saved this club from selling to a developer. That was me. My father's mouth opened. Closed. The guest passes your table is using tonight, I continued, are courtesy passes I authorized last month when Derek told me you'd booked for the gala. I thought about saying something then. I decided to let the evening say it instead. Marcus had appeared behind my parents. Courtney was beside him. Aunt Renee and Paul had followed, because family groups move toward conflict the way water moves toward drains. This is, my father stopped. Started again. This isn't. Gerald. My mother's voice was strange. Flattened. Gerald, stop. My father looked at Derek. Is this true? Ms. Carter has been the majority stakeholder of this property for 3 years, Derek said. She is, as of tonight, also the person who just asked me not to revoke your guest access, which I want you to understand is the second time this evening she's acted in your interest rather than her own. The first time, in case it needs saying, was not telling them before tonight. We did not have the full conversation in the middle of the gala. That was not the right place, and I was not willing to give my father the spectacle of a public argument. I asked Derek to have the private dining room opened, and the 8 of us, my family without the Forsyths, who were graciously and efficiently redirected to their table by Derek's assistant, sat down together in a room hung with photographs of the club's history, and I told them the truth. Not as a weapon. As a fact. I told them about Cornell. About the jobs I'd worked to pay for it. About Kellner Group and Sylvia, who had been sitting at table 1 and who, by the time this conversation was happening, had poured herself a second glass of wine and was, she told me later, rooting for you so hard I bit through my cocktail straw. I told them about the acquisition. About the 3 years of reconstruction. About the waiting list of 200 members who had wanted to be part of something I had built. My mother cried partway through. Not dramatically. My mother was not a dramatic crier. She cried the way people cry when they realize they have made an error too large to easily correct, and the full weight of it lands at once. My father did not cry. My father sat very still and looked at the photographs on the wall, and I watched him do the math. The 25 years of membership, the renovation he had praised to his friends, the drainage fix he had called, finally, some competent management. And I watched the math arrive at its answer. Marcus said at one point, Diane, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Courtney asked. She asked it simply, without edge. The question of someone genuinely trying to understand. I thought about that for a moment. It's 20 years of being the footnote, I said. And tonight was the first time the footnote became the chapter. There are things I need to tell you about what happened after that room. The guest passes remained valid. My parents finished the evening, not at the head table, not with me, but at their own table with their own friends. And if the dinner was quieter than they had planned, if my father's birthday toasts were shorter than usual, that was not something I had caused. That was the weight of knowing settling over a table. Sylvia found me near the end of the evening by the bar, and she put her arm around me and didn't say anything for a while. That is a specific kind of friendship, the kind that knows when words would be smaller than the moment. Derek, who had executed the entire evening with his usual quiet excellence, told me as the last guests were leaving that he had never been prouder to work for anyone. I told him that was because he had extraordinary judgment. He said that was accurate, but beside the point. My father called me the following Thursday. The call lasted 41 minutes. I'm not going to reproduce it fully because some of it belongs only to us, to him and to me, and to the specific complicated language of a father and daughter who love each other in ways that got buried under years of expectation and silence. He said, "I didn't see you." I said, "No." He said, "I'm sorry. I have been waiting for those words for a long time. I want to tell you that hearing them fixed everything, that the 41 minutes on the phone repaired the 3 decades before them. But that is not how it works. What I can tell you is that the words were real. I could hear it. My father, the man who had looked past me my entire life, was for the first time looking directly at me, even across the distance of a phone call, and telling me the truth about what he had done. It's not nothing. It's not everything. It's the beginning of something that may take years to build and may never be fully built. And that is simply the reality of families that have let distance grow too long. My mother wrote me a letter. 4 pages handwritten in her careful cursive. She said things in that letter that she has never said out loud in my presence. She said she had always known I was capable. She said she had let my father's framework become her own, and she was ashamed of that. She said she wanted to have dinner with me, just the two of us, and talk. We had that dinner 6 weeks later. It was not easy. It was also not nothing. Marcus and I have always been close in the specific way of siblings who are on the same side but have been standing in different rooms. What changed after the gala was that we started standing in the same room more often. He calls me on Sunday mornings now. We talk about the business and about our parents and about Courtney's pregnancy. They are expecting a girl in March, a fact that fills me with a joy I wasn't prepared for. I will be an aunt. I have already put her on the Harrington's membership list. The drainage on the back 9 is perfect now. On clear mornings in September, before the golfers arrive and before the staff is fully in motion, I sometimes walk the course alone. Not because I do not golf, I find golf baffling, but because I like to see the thing I built while it is quiet. 14 acres outside Philadelphia. A 100-year-old building with original millwork that took 18 months to restore properly. A membership of 640 people who chose to be part of something that almost didn't survive. I did not build it to prove anything to my family. I want to be clear about that. I built it because the 12-year-old girl who cut an article out of a magazine and kept it in a desk drawer for years grew up and became the person who could. But I will tell you this. That Thursday morning after the gala, when I walked the back 9 in the early fog, I felt the cufflinks in my coat pocket. My father had pressed them into my hand at the end of our phone call, in a gesture I had not expected and could not fully explain. And I understood something about the difference between the life you build in spite of people and the life you build so completely that the spite dissolves, and what's left is just the work and the morning and the 14 acres that are yours. The Harrington Country Club will host its 102nd Founders Gala next October. Table 1 will be set for 8. My father's name is on the guest list. I put it there myself.